Hey guys, so today I am going to be making an intro video sort of after the fact here for the series that I had made on doing task management with Agile software systems. So a few weeks back, I had started tracking all of the work that I'm doing here in my personal life using a software tool called DevOps. Now, DevOps is a piece of software used for software development by Agile software development teams. And so this is a piece of software that I've been using at work for a few months now. Actually, we switched to Jira pretty recently, which is kind of a competing product that does the same thing. But in any case, the goal of this in what I was trying to do was leverage some of that knowledge and experience I have in these tools from my professional job in my personal life here. And so I was just going to try to organize things more. I've had to-do lists for quite a while. I was a triple major in college, so I had lots of stuff I had to organize and keep track of. And I moved away from like planners, as in like things where I physically wrote stuff out. Well, moved away from that a long time ago. But in college, I used text documents, so basically glorified to-do lists. Now it got a little bit more complicated, and I had a bit more of a system than that. But I thought, you know what? Let me try organizing stuff more. Let me try using these software tools that I use in my day job as a computer scientist or a software engineer for the Air Force here. And let me see if I can leverage some of those to organize work in my personal life more effectively. So this was kind of an experiment of sorts. And the video today, like I said, I'm doing this after the fact, after having already switched to kind of a different system of doing progress summary videos each and every day, which is kind of not Agile. Agile is organized into 2-week sprint cycles here. So what I'm doing now is not this, but I kind of decided on what I'm doing after having this experience here. And so I want to kind of make this video here when I'm posting all of the videos in this series on Agile task management for historical reference purposes. Well, I kind of want to make this video just to explain kind of what the goals were here, why I did this, and why I'm leaving it up on the channel here, sort of for explanation purposes. So this is just a bit here about Agile software development frameworks in general. So like I had just mentioned there, at work, my team uses these tools for Agile software development because we are an Agile team. So we were using DevOps for a while on our local development server, and we recently switched to Jira here. So this is I have these up. DevOps is developed by Microsoft. Jira is developed by Atlassian, it's other software company. And this is kind of what the tools look like. You have all these tasks that you manage, and you have these boards tracking to do and progress done. Sometimes they do Kanban more specifically with like swim lanes and that sort of thing. And then you track all these issues and releases and blah, blah, blah. So you'll see if you keep watching this series and have a look at some of the videos I do, well, you'll see what DevOps looks like, because that's what I was using in my trial run here of sorts. But in any case, these are the software development tools kind of that are most commonly used in implementing an Agile software development workflow. And so the goal was I was going to go ahead and use these things in my personal life to kind of organize work in the same way that I do when I'm at my job. And so I'm just going to give a whirlwind introduction here to what the Agile software development frameworks here are kind of used for. And then I'll go into kind of how I was using them in my personal task management, and then kind of why I moved away from using them. So at a high level, these frameworks in an Agile software development workflow are quite useful in breaking down work into kind of smaller chunks and then organizing those, defining the scope of the work to be completed in each of them, and then kind of prioritizing them and doing them in order. So work is organized into these things called backlog items. You may sometimes hear product backlog item or PBI. That's typically what we call them at work, at least. And each one of these things represents basically a specific piece of functionality that you're implementing, or something that you're doing at a high level. So a goal to be accomplished. And then each one of these things is sized, which kind of means just to give it a relative measure of effort in terms of how much you think it will take to complete it. We typically actually use Fibonacci numbers here because the larger a task is, usually the harder it is to be very specific about how much time it will take or how big you think it is effort-wise, because you kind of have a better idea of how small tasks will break down and what's involved in them And then the bigger things get, the more uncertainty there is. And so that's why I use Fibonacci numbers, because they get bigger as you go up. But in any case, what this is kind of just a relative measure of how much effort each one of these things you're trying to accomplish will take. And then actually these wider things, again, what we call PBIs or these goals that you have in mind, well, typically you break those down into smaller tasks. So PBIs have tasks. Usually they have several or more of them. And these individual tasks are the things that you give hours to. So you kind of estimate the size for the whole thing using this like less fine-grained number here is more of an estimate. And then you try to drill down a little bit more specifically when you're tasking stuff and put hours on the tasks. And the backlog items here, so the PBIs, are typically organized into backlogs. And so each project has a wider backlog that kind of represents the work that needs to get done eventually, the stuff that you haven't done yet. And then these things are generally grouped into smaller backlogs subdivided by 2-week periods of work that we call sprints. And so these smaller backlogs, so-called sprint backlogs, are where you're kind of grouping work for each work cycle. So the tasks that you're going to do in a given 2-week period. Now, things aren't pulled into one of these smaller backlogs until they're completely ready to be worked. So you might think of this in terms of like states. It's called like the ready state. And this might seem kind of hard to understand initially, but what we mean by ready is that all dependent tasks have been completed. So if something needs to get done before you can do something else, well, that's called a dependent task. And then all ambiguous requirements have been clarified. So we typically work based off things called acceptance criteria, which is if we're trying to develop the system to do something, well, we need to know what it's supposed to do. We need to know what the goals are, what the objectives are for this thing we're trying to accomplish, so that we have a standard to say, have we done it yet? So we need to clarify what done means, basically. And there's several other things that go into this, but those are the basic parts of what makes something, quote unquote, ready to be worked. And so once something's ready, you can pull them into one of these smaller sprint backlogs because the work is ready to be accomplished. It's ready to be picked up as a task for someone to do. Now, at any given point in time, the wider backlog for the project, right, the less specific one that's not organized for a particular sprint, well, that backlog should actually have a lot more work ready to be worked that can fit in the next 2-week sprint. General rule of thumb, you should have like 2 to 3 sprints out of tasks ready so that you can kind of pick and choose to have a good work composition. So for example, that you don't only have really big, nasty ones in one sprint and then a whole bunch of really easy ones the next one. You kind of want to balance that a little bit so that you have a good composition of things that you're trying to work in any given period. And then this is really important. Of course, this is important in general, but Agile specifically does emphasize this, that you should work things according to their importance and priority, meaning you work more important and more urgent things first. Now, it's kind of common sense, right? That if you have a bunch of things that aren't as important, well, you're not going to start with those. You're going to put the highest risk things first, the things that bring you the most value, because you want to be delivering as much value as possible every single sprint. Value is kind of what they measure here in terms of how much work you're getting done according to the objectives you're trying to fulfill. And so in all of this, there's like charts and metrics that can be used to track the work. There's something called a burn down chart that kind of shows how all of the work you've planned and effort points and hours burn down over time as you complete tasks until you get to the end of the sprint where either you've completed everything, so it's 0, or stuff rolls over and you didn't finish quite everything. Well, that shows how work is completed over the course of a sprint. And then another thing that people commonly measure here in the Agile software development world is this thing called velocity, which represents how much work in terms of the effort value, so the Fibonacci numbers we mentioned there, how much effort was completed in a given sprint. So this is a number, it might be like 25 or 40 or whatever. And then you use this metric here to track a team's productivity over time. Depending on some factors, this can go up and down, but in general, you kind of want to not be trending downwards here. Trending upwards isn't always possible. Eventually, you'll kind of reach a steady state equilibrium where you're completing about the same amount of work every sprint, and you've sort of hit your stride and figured out where your team's productivity is. But it really helps you in projecting how much longer it will take you and your team to finish all the work left in the big backlog. So this is really important anytime you're in a business context, because they always want to know how much longer is it going to take to finish the software application, and how much more money do we need to set aside to pay the developers here based on the time it will take. Well, those sorts of business projections are incredibly important. And so this sort of thing, this metric here, figuring out how productive your team is and then trying to kind of predict how long it will take to complete the rest of the work given that, is one of the big things that Agile software development gives you. I mean, it has many advantages. We're not really going to go into all of them here, but this is something that is super duper useful in a professional context in the business world, because, well, you really do care about things like that. Now, these aren't the only two. I'm just kind of giving the greatest hits version here in this summary. There's also other charts and metrics that are used in Agile software development. You may hear this thing called cumulative flow and a cumulative flow diagram and things like that. Well, in any case, the point is, using these Agile software development frameworks to organize your work into sprints and back prioritize tasks and work with the backlogs and all that, and then measure the metrics with burn downs and velocity and all that. Well, this is kind of what Agile is used for in the professional context in software development. And so the basic idea here for me was I was going to kind of use these frameworks that I was comfortable with at work to try to organize work in my personal life as well. So if I'm using these tools and I know the workflow and the process in terms of software development, well, why not do some of the stuff that I'm doing with my ministry or any of the other writing that I want to do for my personal site or whatever? Why not organize some of that work in the same way, right? If it has all these advantages, then kind of makes sense to try to carry some of those over here too, right? So I actually did this for a full 3 sprints here, so 6 weeks total, and you'll see the later videos in this playlist. So the remaining 6 videos in this playlist are for this specifically. So each sprint in Agile software development typically has a planning day where you go through and you kind of plan out all the tasks that you're going to do. That's sometimes where you assign hours to the tasks and kind of split things out specifically. And then at the end of the sprint, you have a review where you kind of go over the stuff you got done, and then a time called the retrospective, or retro is what everyone calls it, retro for short, which is where you kind of go over what went well, what didn't go well, how can you do better in the future to make you and your team work more efficiently. So that's what the retro is. So the review is basically what did we get done, and the retro is basically how did it go, how can we do better. So I did this for 3 times. So I have 3 sprint planning videos for sprints 1, 2, and 3, and then 3 review/retro videos for the 3 sprints as well. But I actually eventually decided to go back to more kind of how I had been doing things, from college and before, where I had these text documents. So plain text documents that contain to-do lists and associated comments and explanations, rather than dealing with one of these software systems that has these tasks that have the titles and descriptions and metadata and everything organized in the interface here. And there are several reasons for this. I'm just hitting like the big ones. There's a couple more, but these are kind of the greatest hits. The reasons why, having tried this Agile software workflow for organizing my personal work, I kind of decided to go back to something a little bit simpler with less overhead here. And most of the reasons here have to do with all of the advantages that plain text documents have. So the main reasons here, so the first one is that there's like a lot of less overhead involved with a plain text document than dealing with the software interfaces here for the Agile systems. So the big deal is that I don't have to make and organize tasks in a bothersome graphical user interface. And what I mean by that is you have to go click this button to create it, and then go find something in a menu to add it, and then you have to click another button to open up the date adjuster where you pick a date or you project hours or whatever. And so it's kind of fiddly, versus if I have a keyboard-driven text document, well, I can type however fast my typing speed is and jump between the text and everything. So I'm a programmer, which means I spend most of my life at work inside text editors. So I'm very, very accustomed to them and used to them. And I'm very efficient in that environment, which is something that I don't have if I have to use this user interface. And of course, many people use task management systems. So there's like a lot of personal ones as well that aren't so Agile development focused. Like there's a whole bunch of phone apps and computer apps focused on all this productivity stuff. And I've had the same complaint in all of them, is that I'm just a lot less effective whenever I'm in this fiddly, like graphical user interface environment than I am when I'm in a text document, because I'm in complete control in the text document. Now, I'm kind of biased here. Like I said, I'm a software engineer by day. So I'm quite used to all of the text editor stuff, which makes me very fast there. And maybe other people don't have quite as much and they'd rather have the GUI, but well, there you go. So this is a big deal for me personally. The other thing is, and this is just where I'm saying plain text documents come into play with all the advantages there. Well, plain text documents, they let me use all of the tools I'm already accustomed to. So here's a greatest hits list here. So instant searches across the entire text document. I should note very quick searches too. So this is very useful in quickly finding and updating specific thoughts or to-dos. I just need to remember a few keywords, words and phrases, things that I'm trying to do for something, and then I jump there, maybe go down a line or two, go over a couple words, and then boom, I'm already typing, 2 seconds later. And that's way, way faster than having to go search through in a graphical user interface and go try to drag and drop tasks and reorder them and blah, blah, blah. So this is super fast, the searching here. You can use regular expression-based find and replace. So that's really useful if I want to update a bunch of tasks in general and I kept the same format across them. Text editing, key bindings, and macros. So you might think of some of the stuff used in Vim. Now, I actually don't use Vim, but I kind of use the thought processes of Vim a lot in what I do text editing wise. And so that's, moving stuff around, just using the keyboard, not having to copy paste stuff with the mouse. It's a lot faster once you get good at it. Text expansion, so like macros and auto formatting and a whole bunch of short codes. So if I use some abbreviations, well, I can expand those out when I'm in my text editor and things like that. So there's more other than these. These are just some of the ones off the top of my head. So all the advantages of plain text documents in a text editor environment. And then the other thing here is basically just the software development tools for Agile development. They're just kind of overkill for me. If I'm a personal individual, I'm not going to have as hard a time organizing work as I am when I have a team of 5 people. So at my work, I'm a team lead, and so I'm responsible for organizing the work of about a 5-person team, including myself. And so when you have to organize work for 5 people and you have to coordinate tasks between them and make sure that no one is treading on anyone else's toes when you're all working and that you're getting done the work that you want to be doing. Well, when you have 5 people, each person working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it's actually a lot of work you have to organize and keep track of. Well, it's just not nearly so complicated for just me as an individual. And more to the point, I don't really have any of these business projections I need to care about in terms of schedule and dollars and how much is it going to cost and when are you going to finish your work? Well, because I'm going to work continuously. I have my backlog is huge. My to-do list is like thousands of things long. I don't know, thousands, maybe hundreds, but it'll get done when it gets done, basically. And it's somewhat nice to be able to estimate when I'm going to finish certain things, but it's not really that important. And it's definitely not worth the marginal cost that I have to put in terms of the extra time it takes for me to track the time I'm spending on things and estimate the size and all that. Well, that has overhead associated with it. It takes time to figure out how much time it's going to take you and then make projections based on that. And so in my personal use case, where I don't really care about that nearly as much, well, the marginal cost of the extra time I have to spend in organizing the work and assigning efforts and hours to stuff and then tracking the time spent and all that, it's just not worth what you gain for it. Now, in a business context, like I said, almost always worth it. And especially when you have to organize work for a whole bunch of people and coordinate it between individuals and make sure that all the tasks that are getting worked are kind of independent from one another while working towards the same goal that you have in that sprint. Well, all of that to say that when you have more people, like an entire team of people that you have to coordinate work for, and you care about the metrics and the projections and all of that stuff, well, then these things kind of come into their own in a way that a normal text document doesn't. And so basically I can get away with the text documents. And so I can get away having all of these advantages here that I'm mentioning, because I don't really need kind of the rest of what comes along with the software development tools, even though it kind of has its advantages, especially when things get more complex. Well, it's just overkill for these purposes. And if you don't use a text document, then you don't have these advantages. So that's the main gist of it here, why I switch back to my text document approach here. And also, more to the point of all this, you'll notice that, well, I'm doing daily progress summaries now. There's other reasons for why I switched to that. I'm really not going to belabor that point here in this video because I already made a very long introduction video going over the daily progress summaries. So that's the first video in that playlist on this channel. So I'm not going to go over all the reasons, but that was the other thing, is doing things every day there, I found to be much more effective for guiding my own personal work than these 2-week cycles where I have a lot more time in between me kind of organizing work. So it really is something that I do every day. I try to organize and give myself goals every day now. And that just fits more how I actually do work in my personal life versus at work, where we have these wider sprints and deliverables that we try to give to the customer and all of this stuff. Well, it's just a better fit for the work environment, but doesn't work so well when what you're doing is trying to organize work each and every day in your personal life. So if you're interested in all my reasoning as to why I did the daily sort of thing, well, you can go check out that intro video. But I've gone over here why in that intro video, I'm still not doing things daily in Agile task management systems. I'm doing things daily in a text document for these reasons and everything that I've gone over here. All right, so in the spirit of the Agile systems here, well, I'm just going to do a brief retro here. So despite everything we've talked about, it might seem like, okay, I kind of wasted some time. I put some effort in doing all of this and put tasks in that system, and now I'm not going to use them and all that. Well, even despite all that, I'm quite glad that I gave this sort of thing a whirl. It really helped me better figure out how I actually do want to formally organize the work in my personal life. So I kind of just slipped into what I was doing over time. Again, like I said, I'm a software engineer, and so I kind of did that from the get-go, even when I was in college, well, because it made sense to me. But I kind of slipped into it without really formally thinking about it and saying, is this the best? Can I improve this? Is my system good? Are there any weaknesses or areas that I can gain a lot of efficiency gains in and things like that? Well, now I was forced to kind of think rigorously about everything when I tried to move to this system. And now that I've gone back to the text document approach, well, I think I've gained a lot from it, because now I know exactly why I'm doing it. And I've made more of an effort to take advantage of some of the strengths of that medium here in justifying why I'm staying with it. So I think it's helped me figure out a lot what I actually do want to do. And again, the daily thing versus the every 2 weeks thing is, well, being forced to organize my work in these sprints and plan it over the course of a longer period of time made me think, is this the best? Is this what I want to do? And then when I went back to more of a daily thing, I was able to justify it to myself more. I have a lot stronger reasoning in my head now. So I got a lot out of it, actually. So then the reason why I'm leaving this video series up here and why I've actually moved it over here to this daily progress summaries channel, which, as the channel name suggests, is going to be focused on the daily progress summaries. Well, it's mostly just for historical reference purposes. So it's kind of like how I got to where I got, basically. So this series was previously up on my personal YouTube channel, but I wanted to include it here as it kind of lays the foundation for how I ended up where I am today, doing things every day with the personal daily progress summaries, because that kind of grew out of this and my experimentations here. So you can kind of see my thought develop over the course of this series, the 6 videos here, and over time lead me more into what I'm doing now. But this video series I'm leaving up here is mostly just for historical reference purposes, mostly just so people can take a look at how I started out with things before I ended up doing what I'm doing now. So again, the purpose of this video here was just to kind of go over what the general idea was. Why are these videos here? What the purposes were at that point in time, just to provide a bit more context for the rest of the videos on this channel, which are me doing things the daily progress summary video, or sorry, the daily progress summary way of doing things. So I hope this video has been helpful in giving a little bit of background here. And again, if you want more explanation as to why I'm doing what I'm doing now, then I recommend you go check out the introduction video to the daily progress summaries, which I'll link in the description here.